Hey everyone, Tactics here with my second last War Within beta tank preview, where in this video we've got the Blood Death Knight, a tank that's been getting a lot of hype so far on the beta, and for good reason. If you're interested in a different tank spec, I've got videos for all of those ones so far except the Brewmaster over on my channel. That one's going to be coming out soon as well, so make sure you do check out the link in the description or just hop over to my channel to check those out. Otherwise, let's start by looking at the talent trees here for Blood, and this is going to be a pretty long section here, especially compared to the previous tank Vengeance Demon Hunter, because unlike them, both talent trees for Blood have been reworked going into the War Within. So the best way I think to kind of tackle this is maybe to look at a little basically this is the current Dragonflight live talent tree, and I've just kind of plugged in a standard Mythic Plus build here, and we can kind of compare the two, look at different positioning. You see there's been a bit of a rejigging around of a lot of things. You see capstone talents, things like Icy Talons, Runic Attenuation, Unholy Ground, or near capstone talents rather, Unholy Bond. Those things have all been moved up. Soul Reaper as well, up significantly higher, more accessible in the tree. You're able to actually get a lot of these other talents now, which is kind of interesting. Small reworking over here of where the talents are. You see IBF has moved way up, way more accessible. AMS is just baseline now, and you have the anti-magic barrier buff over here. So a lot of things have been made more accessible. You can see 2-point nodes have also been pruned. So you see Veteran of the Third War is now a single node. Wraith Walk is now actually pretty accessible and is something that you can feasibly get now, whereas before it really was not. Some other these sounds like Blood Draw and stuff have been reworked and buffed and made a single point. You're probably still never going to take Blood Draw, but it is there. And you have a bunch of new kind of capstone options here at the bottom. So you have some passive magic damage reduction, as well as magic duration of a magic effect on you reduce. This one, which is kind of an interesting niche choice, where it increases AMS's cooldown, but it can now also remove harmful magic effects, so you don't need to pre-AMS them anymore if there's something that you're fine just waiting to actually see if you get it and not gambling to see if you get it by pressing AMS. That could be potentially useful. Very niche though. You of course have A-Bombs them, which notably now they've taken and pulled out all of the generation out of it, the resource generation, including like the Bone Shield stuff for Blood. This does come back in a new Spec tree talent, but for the other DK specs, they wanted to pull out the resource generation. Dust Echo is all the way down here now. There's this new Vestigial Shield now, which puts AMS onto nearby allies and reduces the duration of harmful magic effects against them as well. This won't pre-immune to my knowledge. Like, you can't put up AMS on people and then a magic effect doesn't get applied to them. It'll still get applied. It's just 50% reduced. At least that's how I understand it. So basically, just looking here, you get pretty much exactly everything that you've already had, as well as some additional stuff that we talked about at the bottom. Also, this talent here, Subduing Grasp, you get a DR when you would pull an enemy, and this counts as like would pull an enemy. So your A-Bombs limb, as well as your individual grips, even if it's a lieutenant mob that doesn't get gripped or a boss mob that doesn't get gripped, this still applies a DR to them. So that's actually really cool. Just generally pretty solid changes here for the Death Knight tree. Now let's move to the Blood tree. Again, I've got a little build there. We'll move that to the side. There we go. Boom. And so there's a couple things right off the bat here to note. Crimson Scourge and Death's Caress are immediately baseline, so that is very, very nice. And actually, now that I speak about it, speaking of Crimson Scourge, there's a very, very significant change I didn't touch on, and that is related to Cleaving Strikes. Cleaving Strikes here, guys, now persists for 4 seconds after you leave your Death and Decay or your Death and Decay expires. Very similar to that Consecrate talent, so this is a nice little quality of life where you will maintain that cleaving of your Heart Strike or whatever other ability for another DK spec even after leaving Death and Decay. So that's really, really nice, but that just reminded me because of Crimson Scourge. Anyways, back to it. These two are now baseline. In its place is that new talent I talked about, Bone Collector. So when you would pull an enemy with a grip or a Bombs Limb, even if the enemy can't be gripped, you gain a stack of Bone Shield. Really, really nice talent to have. And in Death's Caress place is Ossified Vitriol. When you lose a Bone Shield charge, it increases the damage of your next Mirror Rend by 15%, stacking up to 75%. So Mirror Rend, not something that you pressed very often at all throughout Dragonflight, really. And so now this is making that feel a little bit better by making Mirror Rend hit significantly harder, which is kind of nice. Moving down here, you also see Gore Fiends is no longer in the capstone area, thank God. It's now over here on the left side of the tree, and they've readjusted Tightening Grasp to now make it a 3-second silence on top of the 30-second CDR. Personally, with how the tree currently works out, I don't see a reason to ever tank this talent, at least in Mythic Plus. The only niche value is against spam casters because Gorfian's Grasp on its own is already an AoE stop, right? I told you you're going to stop those mobs, and silencing them for 3 seconds is a pretty minor increase to it that doesn't really, do much in the vast majority of situations. Again, maybe in raid, if you specifically need a mass grip every minute and a half, then you would take this talent. But at least in Mythic Plus, I don't see a reason to ever actually spec in a Tightening Grasp. And a lot of times with Gorfian being a 2-minute baseline, that's going to be something that you also potentially, even as Sun Lane, you can't really spec into. So something to keep in mind there. I'd like to maybe see them, potentially just remove this talent and bake the 30 seconds of CDR into Gorfian's itself, because this being a 2-minute AoE thing is probably, it's a little long. It's definitely a little long. And this point, just with the current situation in the DK tree, or the blood tree rather, it feels like you're never going to be able to actually even afford to take this without giving up some pretty significant points. Speaking of some points that have changed, there's a lot to talk about here. Reinforced Bone here now allows Bone Shield to stack 2 additional times up to 12, which is really, really nice synergy with the reworked Bone Storm, which now no longer consumes runic power and instead consumes up to 10 Bone Shields. Not more than 10 now. Previously in the first Mythic Plus iteration was taking all of your Bone Shields, but now it's been fixed. It takes up to 10 Bone Shields, which means if you have 12 Bone Shields, this will drop you down to 2, but you'll still have Bone Shields left. You won't feel, super, super weak. And then on top of that, and dealing AoE damage, this is going to then give you 1 Bone Shield per second for the entire duration, which again, the duration is based on the number of Bone Shields it actually gets to eat. Damage-wise, this seemed a bit underwhelming, to be honest with you. And the only Mythic Plus testing I did with it was when it was broken and taking all your Bone Shield charges. Want to try it out. Mythic Plus isn't obviously open this week for some reason, but I'll try this out again. But I wasn't feeling super, super great about the overall output of Bone Storm, but that's just a tuning problem that can 100% be fixed. Speaking of your other CDs as a DK now, we saw buffs to both Blood Drinker and Consumption to make them more on par, since they are now a capstone talent. As you can see, they've been moved all the way down here to the capstone. So Blood Drinker is now a 20% single target DR on your target and for 5 seconds after you fully channel. And Consumption now also causes Blood Plague to occur 50% more quickly for 8 seconds. On top of that, there's a new talent in the capstone called Carnage, which causes whichever one of those abilities to contribute to your Blood Shield mastery. And then also, whenever an enemy strikes your Blood Shield, the cooldown of whichever one you have has a chance to be reset. This, I am really excited about trying out, specifically Deathbringer with the Consumption Carnage, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Seems really, really cool in Mythic Plus. This one is obviously more of a raid-oriented thing, but I have a hard time thinking maybe you'll take Carnage unless there's specifically a boss fight where you're constantly taking damage. That's kind of the issue with Blood Decay, right? Anything that requires you to, be hit or consume a Bone Shield or stuff like that, you don't have a lot of ways to proc that, and in a raid environment, it can, go down in value a bit. But at least for Mythic Plus, this is super, super cool. Definitely can't wait to play around with that. And there's also this new talent here, Bloodied Blade, which was just implemented this build, where parrying an attack gives you a stack of the strength buff up to 4%, so 8 stacks. And then when you hit 8 stacks, it does a 200% effectiveness hard strike and then gives you a bigger strength buff for 6 seconds. So I really want to test that out, kind of see what the uptime is. Parry, especially in the first patch of the expansion here, you have I think it's less than 20%. We can look at my character sheet here. Yeah, we're at 18% parry right now, and obviously you get the plus 40%. I have nothing to hit here with Rune Weapon, but you get plus 40% with Rune Weapon. So in your Rune Weapon, it's going to be, probably pretty consistent depending on if there's an ICD on this and whatnot. Again, haven't been tested yet because it was implemented this build, and there hasn't been Mythic Plus testing this build. But that is something that is potentially interesting and also opens up some more pathing options, right? It gives you another way to get down to Red Thirst and to get down to Bloodshot. So potentially, maybe you could drop Sanguine Ground and take this. Obviously, if you're in raid environment and you're going to be getting hit a lot, potentially you could drop this and take Bloodied Blade. But obviously, again, that requires you to get hit a lot. And otherwise, you can just go to something like Blood Drinker in a raid environment. Lots of options here, which is very, very nice to see. Still a couple problems. These healing talents on the left side here, where you get Heart Strike healing you for a tiny bit of health, and also AMS healing you. I still don't know how those talents actually survived the purge here. They both existed still previously, and these talents are just so beyond useless for blood DK. So would also like to see these just replaced, because I don't even know if there's a way to make these really super viable. Entirely a new talent just needs to be in these spots, in my opinion. And again, same thing I talked about earlier with tightening grass. But if you kind of look here at what you're getting with the new blood tree, you have a lot of the same thing, right? Things like Heartbreaker is now a 1-point talent that you were able to get. Whereas things like a Perseverance, the Ebon Blade is now a 1-point talent versus Relish in Blood. You just kind of took this because Relish in Blood was the 1-point talent, but now that Perseverance is also a 1-point talent, I think you're probably going to be pathing through that to get down to like Coag and Sanguine Ground. And you can see here, I mean, you got a lot of the same, right? You're gaining Bone Collector, you're gaining Ossified Vitriol because these are just now baseline. You're basically switching Relish in Blood for Perseverance of the Ebon Blade, and you're getting a couple points. You're gaining the potential to get Mass Grip, but this can be played around with that. You can put Mass Grip like in Voracious if you want that. You can put Mass Grip in like Foul Bulwark and Bloodworms, right? You can kind of put this wherever you want. Same in the Capstone area. You have a lot of flexibility now, right? Like in Mythic Plus, maybe you don't want Sanguine Ground, maybe you want Bloody Blade, maybe you don't want to play, you know, Consumption here, maybe you want to play Bone Storm, and again, you can put that in Bloody Blade. So you have quite a few options here, at least now, as a blood DK, whereas previously you were exceptionally locked in. Not gonna lie, a lot of the talents in the middle are still locked in, at least in Mythic Plus, but you have significantly more flexibility than you did before, which is really, really nice to see. That's always what you want to see from a rework of this magnitude. Now, let's move on here from talents, and let's talk about tier sets here, which is, you know, it's relatively boring. None of the tier sets are super, super exciting. Blood DK is no different here. So basically, when Bone Shield is up, you get a flat 2% DR. Great. When you lose a Bone Shield, you have a chance to also gain a 1% DR up to a max of 3% there for 6 seconds. This has a relatively low proc rate. Not really something you're going to be thinking about. The DR is ridiculously just low anyways. In general here, a lot of tanks are just getting kind of 3% flat DR across the board. This one's a little different, but it's not really impactful. The 4-piece here, your damage is increased by 1% per Bone Shield charge, and then when you take damage while below 6 Bone Shield charges, you have a chance to generate 1 to 2 charges. So kind of like a bit of counter synergy here between the 2 and 4-piece, where the 2-piece, it wants you to actually like get hit and reduce Bone Shield charges to get more value out of it, and the 4-piece wants you to not get hit and not lose Bone Shield charges to gain value of it. Currently, it's capped at 10% damage, which is a lot compared to the other tank specs overall. It's one of the higher damage ones for tanks in this first season. So I do wonder if either that gets brought down or that is something that other tanks get brought up. Also, it doesn't scale with the 12 Bone Shield talent, the Reinforced Bones. If you have 12 stacks of Bone Shield, you still only get a 10% buff. So that is something to keep in mind as well. And just generally, it seems like the 2-piece is going to be a bit better in Mythic Plus because of how that leans towards consuming Bone Shields, and the 4-piece damage bonus is going to be a bit better in raids, but you'll likely be able to generate more Bone Shields in a Mythic Plus environment. Overall, it's not super impactful. It's relatively high damage, but it's not really something you're going to probably notice very much at all, which is par for the course for these first season tier bonuses. That brings us to the actual hero talents themselves, and let's start off here with Deathbringer, which is a hero tree that revolves around kind of Shadow Frost damage via Blood Plague and Blood Boil, as well as this new cooldown in Reaper's Mark. Basically, this is kind of a single target thing that you throw out on people, which kind of stacks up as you deal Shadow or Frost damage, and then after either 12 seconds or you reach the max stacks, it explodes for additional damage. And there's some like adjustments to make it an AoE explosion here, and there's like some ways for, you know, when you press it, it shoots out a wave that deals damage and applies like a damage amp and stuff like that. And then it can also apply Soul Reaper and stuff and deals more damage based on missing health. But basically, it's an explosion. And then it also, what it does is it empowers your next Marrow Rend from the capstone here. So when it explodes, your next Marrow Rend costs, you know, no runes, and it summons 2 scythes to strike your target, and these scythes do a bunch of damage, and they can also like apply Blood Plague and stuff like that. And of course, it's Shadow Frost damage, so it's really cool. It plays around, you know, empowering that Marrow Rend, which is a button you haven't pressed a lot again historically in Dragonflight. And there's, you know, a bit of crit synergy in here where, you know, the wave you shoot out can deal additional stack of damage amp, and there's also additional Shadow Frost crits apply more stacks. You can detonate that a little bit quicker. And the real cool thing, I think, is this choice note here in the bottom left, where you can either have Reaper's Mark, which is a 1-minute baseline CD, be reduced to a 30-second CD and have its cost reduced by 1, Or you can have it stay as a 1-minute CD, deals a little bit more damage, but it now empowers 2 Marrow Rends instead of 1. So you get 2 of these Exterminate casts, but the Marrow Rends aren't free. They still cost 1 rune. And then on top of this, Exterminate, which actually I didn't mention here, when it actually happens, it has a 20% chance, I believe, to apply Reaper's Mark again to your target. And so this increases that to 30%. So pretty interesting choice note here where you want to, gamble a little bit more, but have 2 of these Marrow Rends you can use for a bit of a cost, or do you want to have the more consistent lower cooldown, which you have more control over? Pretty cool choice node nonetheless. I'm sure there's going to be, a meta thing to pick here, but it's an interesting choice node. I hope they each have situations where they're good. The other thing to note too about these empowered Marrow Rends is there's no timer on them. So if you go in here and you get your empowered Marrow Rend, actually go hit the stuff to show you guys. If you get your empowered Marrow Rend, you can just hold it for as long as you want. So you want to hold it for a burst phase. You want to hold it until the next trash pull in a dungeon so that you can start off with a big Marrow Rend. That's something you can do. So you can throw out the mark here, and I'm just need to deal shadow damage to actually proc it real quick here, and you're going to see my Marrow Rend's going to light up. Cool animation on this too, by the way. Eventually I will do enough shadow. There we go. So I have my Marrow Rend lit up, and I can just hold this for as long as I want. There's the buff here, so you can see no timer on the buff, so you can hold that as long as you want. And then if you actually look here, when I actually press Marrow Rend here, Marrow Rend goes off, it's free, boom, double scythe there. There's 2 6 scythes that do AoE damage there. I did not get a Reaper's Mark proc onto the guy, unfortunate, but looks very, very cool. In terms of Shadow Frost damage sources, like I said, you have Blood Plague has a chance to deal Shadow Frost here, and then also Blood Boil turns into Shadow Frost. That also has like a new blue and shadowy animation, which is kind of cool. So another one that has some pretty interesting animations here. The defensive one, you really only choices of Blood Decays, Rune Carved Plates. This one is just, when you lose 25% of your max health, which can happen all the time, it's just going to proc on CD. It's not actually good. So you go to Rune Carved Plates, which is just giving you basically passive stacking magic damage and fizz damage DR. Relatively short CD, so you're going to have to likely build this up every time you enter like a pull or anything like that. And actually, because of the low haste values to start out the expansion here, you sometimes are going to have trouble actually maintaining the fizz DR from the runes generating, which is semi-problematic, but that's something that's just going to be fixed, I think, by having a higher amount of haste later on in the expansion. And like I was saying, because of this Blood Plague amp, because of this one also amping Blood Plague here, causing it to deal damage more quickly, this has some really, really cool synergy with Consumption also causing Blood Plague to take more quickly. Yes, your Blood Plague is just going to take exceptionally fast, but that is kind of a good thing. And overall, your damage ends up being like you can see this was not obviously an accurate breakdown at all. Maybe I have one in here somewhere where I was actually hitting a dummy. Hard to say, but yeah, here's one maybe where, your Blood Plague is a significant portion of your damage, right? Blood Plague does a lot of damage in the Deathbringer build. A heavy focus on that. And then, of course, this Reaper's Mark debuff, which is kind of interesting. It adds another button in here. And then you have the button from Consumption. So, you're getting a little button heavy, as long as you're not adding like something like Bone Storm on top of this. I haven't run out of binds, so we're good. But you're definitely adding a few more short CDs as Blood Decay, which is kind of something you were missing before. So I'm not actually mad about that. Now, let's go to Sanlean. Actually, I think I just have a Sanlean thing right here. And this is a hero tree that more revolves around Vampiric Blood, a modified Heart Strike called Vampiric Strike, and then also some additional empowerments to Death and Decay or Crimson Scourge. So essentially here, at the top here, your Death Strike has a 10% chance to make your next Heart Strike a Vampiric Strike. And also, when you're in your Vampiric Blood, your Heart Strike is always a Vampiric Strike, and basically what the strike does a little bit of self-healing, which is kind of irrelevant, but more importantly, it gives you a stacking haste buff, which is up to a pretty significant amount of haste, right? So just baseline is 10.5%, and there's like a 150%, here it is, when you're actually in your Vamp Blood window, that's increased by 150%, so you have a ton of haste, just baseline as a Sanlean, which is kind of crazy. Like, I was getting over 50% kind of haste just sitting around at that, with Sanlean in the first tier of an expansion where I'm in like normal mode raid gear, right? So having that much haste early on in the expansion definitely feels really, really, really good. Now, something to note is that the actual spec tree for Blood potentially feels a bit more talent locked in Sanlean compared to Deathbringer, because I feel like you really want to improve Vampiric Blood, right? A 40% increase on your now main significant damage cooldown is pretty relevant for sure. And, that because needing to put 2 talents here kind of causes some issues going down the way. Like I think I had to drop Hemostasis and Gorfiends here to continue to progress down. And then we get down here and you're not really too concerned, I think, about consumption, and you kind of still need a path down this way. So potentially, again, you could drop this to take consumption. You could drop Bone Storm to take Carnage. I wanted to think I give Bone Storm another chance and also try Bloody Blade, so I'm going to try out this. But you have a little bit of flexibility in the capstone still, at least. But at least in the body here of the tree, the second area, it's a little bit point starred, because it does really feel like you want the improved Vampiric Blood, because that's your damage. But also you want improved Heart Strike, because Vamp Strike scales off of this talent as well, it seems. So you really want both of these. The other thing is that your kind of main rotation in your cooldown, so in your Vampiric Blood, is a bit odd, because you're just trying to Vampiric Strike as much as humanly possible. And this is a generator, right? So you will hit your cap of resources, and you will continue to do it, because there are talents like this, Infliction of Sorrow, where when you do Vampiric Strike, it deals, some of your Blood Plague damage, and then it extends it. And then at the end of your Vampiric Blood window, when your regular Heart Strike, it consumes that to deal all the remaining damage to the target, right? So it really incentivizes you to Vampiric Strike as much as humanly possible, even if you are capped on resources. And the only reason you would ever Death Strike is if you're 1, about to die, or 2, about to run out of your Coag buff. So that's the only thing you're really cracking there, is your health and your Coag buff. Otherwise, it's just Vampiric Strike, Vampiric Strike, Vampiric Strike, Vampiric Strike, right? So that is, a bit, maybe some would say, degenerate playstyle, and I don't know how you would fix that, but that is the current way it is. It's not too bad, but you have very high Vampiric Blood uptime, right? If I just kind of go in here and let's, pop that, pop whatever, press some random buttons there, build up some of my stacks of my thing preemptively before I actually pop my Vampiric, and then let's say boom, and let's go Vampiric Blood. So we're doing this all the way up. We have a few seconds still before we want to press that. We have a Crimson Scourge proc. We're still pressing. We're out of runes. Still pressing. We're out of runes again. Need a Bone Shield. Boom, that's done now. And then I do this, and it did probably a bigger explosion at the end there. But you can see how much damage there Infliction of Sorrows. And that was from the beginning, where I had to Death Strike a little bit more. And you can see here, actually, if I had kept going, I would have had Vampiric Strike. Like, I have it very quickly, right? Boom, like it's already back, and I walked away from the dummy. So like you go from Vampiric Blood window to Vampiric Blood window very quickly with this build, just because of how it works. Oh, leg spike, there we go. Leg spike in my Vampiric Blood window, we're good. And that's, like, look, I'm at 30 seconds, and I lagged in the middle of that thing, and I spent, what, maybe like less than 10 globals outside of Vampiric Blood, and I have it back now with, the Vampiric Blood improved, as well as the Red Thirst. So you spend a lot of time in Vampiric Blood, which is why it's a bit problematic that you're so heavily incentivized to not press Death Strike or just press Vamp Strike in there. But, maybe that's, I think in Mythic Plus, obviously, you're going to be taking a lot more damage, so you're going to want to Death Strike a little bit more. You're going to be forced to do that. But in a raid situation, you're just going to be ripping Vampiric Strikes, right? Especially if you're not tanking the boss. That window is going to do a ton of damage, right? So something to be aware of here. There's also, again, like I mentioned, some decent incentive to stand in Death and Decay in this, because of here. Yeah, so physical damage taken reduced by 5%, and also 5% increased Vampiric Strike chance. So 10% up to 15% for Death Strike. And also, of course, you get some Crimson Scourge synergy here, where you get some strength after you consume it, and that kind of goes hand in hand with getting the verse here after consuming it. So again, that's a similar reason why you would want to do that as a at least a Sand Lane. At least take Perseverance over Relish in Blood. You also have the Blood Beast, which actually maybe I didn't point him out. The Blood Beast looks kind of cool. He looks like the last boss in Underrot. He also deals a pretty significant amount of damage. The Blood is life there. That's the Blood Beast. So you have a chance to spawn him from your, I think it's your Vamp Strikes. Let's see if I get one. Where's the boy? Vamp Strike, Vamp Strike. There he is. Boom. The animation. And this guy looks sick, and he slams things, and like you have the ability to give even more AoE by storing shadow damage, and he explodes at the end. Or you have the ability to just spec into a little bit more execute, where you have an increased chance to trigger Vamp Strike just natty on enemies below 35% health. This might just be better though, because of how little time you spend out of Vamp Blood. But regardless, cool looking dude. I like the animation of that guy. And otherwise here, there's some minor like party benefits, very minor, where you can get some speed for your party here when you press DA, or Wraith Walk, where again, Wraith Walk is actually more accessible now, or some Leech for your party when you press Lichborn, which is kind of cool. Very minor, not anything you're going to specifically take like a DK for, but interesting nonetheless. This one here, the Icebound Fortitude, the killing blow thing, or killing an enemy, does work in Mythic Plus. However, it requires you specifically to get the killing blow, so pretty unreliable here as a tank player to actually get CDR on IBF, and the increased damage reduction on it is kind of irrelevant again for a Blood DK just because of how the spec works. IBF on its own is enough to usually prevent damage from one-shotting you, and all you need is enough time to press Death Strike again, so adding additional DR on top of it is kind of just completely unnecessary and not something you really need. So kind of interesting. Again, very distinct playstyle here between the two different hero trees, different themes that they've made, and that focus on entirely different abilities. They also each have some pretty cool animations and pets and stuff like that, which is a nice positive, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. Are you favoring Deathbringer? Are you favoring Sanlean? Let me know down in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel while you're at it so you don't miss any of the War Within content I have planned for dungeons, raids, and of course, tank specs. As always, I need to give a massive thank you to all of my Patreons for all of their support, and I'll see everyone in the next video.